I was hunched over my laptop in my tiny apartment, editing a series of black and white photos for a project. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a place when you're in your head, absorbed in your work. The silence didn't last long. My phone buzzed on the table. Nathan. I hesitated before swiping the screen, not wanting to deal with him, but I had to. Hey, Em, sold some of your old prints at the garage sale today? Cleared out some space for the new stuff. Good deal, right? I blinked, staring at the words. The prints he was talking about were the ones I'd created in college, a mix of raw, experimental shots that I'd poured everything into, worth far more than Nathan thought. Far more. My heart dropped into my stomach, but I didn't let the panic show. Oh, cool. Glad you were able to get rid of them, I typed back, my fingers stiff as I pretended not to care. Nathan replied almost immediately, clearly proud of himself. Yeah, sold them for like $5 each. Crazy how much space I cleared out. Some of them were kind of weird, but hey, it's all about decluttering, right? I bit my lip, trying not to lash out. $5? They were worth thousands. I could picture it. Some clueless stranger buying my work for pocket change, not realizing they'd just gotten a stolen treasure. I sat back, a sick feeling rising in my chest. I'd always told Nathan my art was just a hobby, something to keep me busy while I figured out what to do with my life. He'd never understood what I was actually building, how much those prints meant, how they represented everything I couldn't explain to him. I looked at my phone again, trying to push down the flood of frustration. I typed one more line. Well, I guess it's good they're out of your way now. I left it at that. The truth was, I couldn't stop calculating. Those prints, the ones Nathan had sold for a few bucks, they'd been worth far more, both financially and artistically. And now they were gone, off in the world, slipping through my fingers. Nathan didn't get it, but I couldn't let him know that. Not yet. I opened my inbox, glancing through the usual mix of updates. Most of it was the same: gallery requests, follow-ups on old exhibits, a few congratulatory emails from clients who had bought my work. But one stood out: an invitation to a major photography show in New York. The name of the gallery had my stomach tightening. This wasn't just another small event. This was a real opportunity, a step up. I scrolled through it quickly, my pulse picking up. This was the kind of thing my parents would never understand. They thought I was still struggling, still lost in my so-called hobby. As I sat there staring at the screen, the weight of the years pressed in on me. Emily, you can't waste your life on this. You need something stable. You need a real career. My dad's voice echoed in my head. His lectures had always been about practicality, about building something you could rely on. And then there was Nathan, my older brother, always so together. Successful, safe, secure. In finance, I could hear his voice too, dismissing me even when he tried to hide it. Honestly, Em, you could make a ton of money if you just focused on something real. You're not getting anywhere with these photos. I hadn't even wanted to tell him about my work. Not at first, anyway. The moment I did, the condescension had been too much. It was like everything I'd fought for, all the nights spent trying to make my art mean something, was erased in an instant, like it didn't matter unless it had a price tag on it. A flood of old memories hit me. Like the time Dad had pointed to Nathan's job at some glossy finance firm and said, "That's how you get ahead. That's how you provide for yourself." It had been a well-meaning, condescending push, like my own dreams were too impractical to chase. Nathan, on the other hand, had always been the golden child. He worked his 9 to 5, kept everything neat and tidy, and no matter how much success I had in the art world, quiet success hidden under the pseudonym Ember, Nathan was always the one they'd measured me against. The successful one, the smart one, the one they could point to and say, "That's the path. That's the way." It was easier to keep things under wraps, easier to play along with their expectations, to downplay what I was actually doing. If they ever found out the truth, they'd just see it as one big mistake, something to be swept under the rug. "How's your photography going, Em?" Nathan would ask, always so detached, like it was some casual thing I was trying for fun. He never understood what it actually meant to me. It wasn't just about taking pretty pictures. It was about creating something real, something people could feel. But to him, it was just a hobby. I rubbed my eyes, pushing those thoughts away. I was so used to bearing them down, pretending their opinions didn't matter. But now, even as my career was taking off, it was hard to shake the feeling that I was still that little girl, looking for approval that was never coming. Still, I couldn't help but feel a quiet pride when I looked at the invitation in front of me. They didn't know it yet, but things were changing. I was getting the recognition they never thought I'd have. The phone buzzed again, another message from Nathan. You should really think about coming out here to visit. You need a change of pace. Get out of that little apartment. Maybe you could do something real while you're here. I scoffed and deleted it without responding. The words something real stung more than usual. But that's how it always went. I was either a failure in their eyes, or I was being told what I should be doing, what I should have been doing all along. And even now, with my career moving forward, the weight of their expectations still hung over me, like I could never escape it. I was still staring at the email from the New York gallery when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I picked it up anyway. Hello? Emily? The voice on the other end was smooth, confident, the kind that made you sit up straighter. This is Jack Mason. I'm an art dealer. We've been in touch before. Though I suspect you didn't know that. My heart skipped. Jack Mason. The name was familiar. He'd bought several of my pieces over the past couple of years, always under the pseudonym Ember. I'd never met him in person, but I knew who he was. He was respected. He moved high-profile pieces. Yeah, I remember you, I said, keeping my voice casual. What's up? I've been tracking the value of your work, Emily. Those prints you've been selling, the ones you put out as Ember, they've been gaining a lot of attention lately. Quite a bit, actually. His voice dropped slightly, like he was making sure I understood. They're worth thousands now, each one. I clenched my jaw, trying not to let the shock show. Thousands. He was talking about the same prints Nathan had sold for a few bucks, the ones I'd poured my soul into. You're saying those prints? I couldn't help the edge in my voice. Exactly. They've reached a level of demand that's unheard of. I'm interested in showcasing your work in a major exhibition. The gallery's been asking for you specifically. I leaned back in my chair, processing. My chest was tight. My brother had given them away for nothing, and now they were worth more than I'd ever expected, more than I'd ever told my family. That's great, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I haven't been actively promoting any of it. I've kept a low profile. I know, Jack said, and there was a slight pause on the other end. That's part of the reason I'm calling. We've kept a close eye on the name Ember. It's not just about the art, it's about the mystery behind it. People are fascinated by it. You've created something bigger than just your prints, but Emily? He cleared his throat. It's time to step out from the shadows. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I could have been recognized for this. I could have had my own name on these pieces in real galleries months, hell, years ago. But the constant pressure from my family, their disbelief in what I was doing, had kept me hidden. I had stayed Ember on purpose. It was safer that way. But now it felt like a double-edged sword. What do you mean, step out? I asked, my mind racing. I've kept my work separate for a reason. Jack seemed to sense the hesitation. You've got something unique here. People are paying attention, Emily. I'm not talking about just another show. This is the kind of thing that'll take you global. You've created a following. I could hear the confidence in his voice, and for the first time in a long time, it felt real. There was no pretending, no hiding behind a name. This was a chance for my work to be seen as it truly was. But at the same time, a thought gnawed at me. If I did this, if I allowed my real identity to be revealed, there was no going back. My family would know. They'd have to know. They'd find out I'd been lying, that I'd been successful all along and didn't tell them. I need to think about it, I said, swallowing hard. Take your time, Jack said, a little softer now. But remember, these opportunities don't last forever. I think you're ready for this. More than ready. He was right. The art world was shifting. Ember had gained the kind of attention I never imagined it would. But the more I thought about it, the more conflicted I became. If I revealed who I was now, I'd be forced to confront everything I'd hidden from my family. Their expectations, their judgments, the idea that they were right about me all along. And yet, as I sat there thinking about Jack's offer, I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. I'd built this career on my own. No thanks to them. The work, the success, it was all mine. Maybe it had been safer to hide behind Ember, but at the same time, that anonymity had allowed me to grow without the constant weight of their disapproval, without the need for their approval at all. I'll let you know soon, I said finally. Thanks for calling, Jack. You got it, he replied. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I hung up, but I didn't move. I just sat there for a moment, staring at the phone. A mix of vindication and frustration swirled inside me. I could have been a more recognized artist if I hadn't hidden behind a name. But then again, Maybe it was that very secrecy, that distance from my family's judgment, that had allowed me to succeed at all. It felt like a choice between the life I'd built and the one my family would never understand. I pulled up to my parents' house, the familiar white exterior almost mocking me. It was like a picture out of a magazine, perfectly manicured lawn, everything in its place. I hated that it always made me feel out of place, like I was the one who didn't belong. I had to brace myself for the usual routine: questions about my career, guilt tripping about my lack of stability, and endless comparisons to Nathan. As I walked in, the smell of something baking hit me. Mom's usual move to make me feel like I was still her little girl. I walked straight into the kitchen, where Mom was already pulling a batch of cookies out of the oven. "Hey, sweetie," she said, offering me a warm smile. "How's everything going? Still taking pictures?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest. "Still doing that." Dad was sitting at the table with a pile of papers, his briefcase nearby. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Typical. He was always busy with work. Nathan, on the other hand, was sprawled out on the couch, flipping through a magazine with a smug grin on his face. "Look who's here," Nathan said lazily, looking up. "How's life in the art world, Em?" I bit my tongue. "It's going." "Yeah, you should have seen some of those prints I sold," Nathan continued, clearly not noticing the tension in my voice. "Made a pretty decent amount of room in the garage. A couple of those old ones of yours, too. People were all over them. You'd be surprised how much stuff sells when you just get rid of it." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Right. Yeah? You mentioned that." Mom and Dad exchanged a glance, their usual subtle judgment flickering behind their eyes. "How much did you get for those prints, Nathan?" Dad asked, finally looking up from his papers. "Oh, just a few bucks each," Nathan said, shrugging. "It wasn't like they were worth much. But hey, it cleared out space, so it was a win-win." I felt the heat in my chest rising. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much those prints were actually worth, how much more they could have been. But I stayed quiet, biting my lip until it hurt. "That's great, son," Dad said, finally smiling at Nathan. "Clearing out space is important. You know, your mom and I were just talking about how important it is to focus on the things that really matter." I nodded, pretending to care. "Yeah, definitely." Nathan laughed. "Yeah, Em, you should think about doing that. You've got so many other things going on, right? Maybe time to let go of the whole photography thing." I wanted to roll my eyes. He didn't even get it. But I didn't argue. I couldn't. Not now. Not here. Instead, I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I'm working on it, Nathan." The conversation drifted to other things: what they were planning for the next family vacation, how Nathan had upgraded to a new car. The usual. They all laughed about nothing, as if everything in their lives was perfect, as if nothing was off limits. Meanwhile, I sat there, feeling like an outsider in my own family. I watched them. My dad with his lawyer mindset, always analyzing, always trying to fix problems he didn't understand. My mom, always trying to make everything nice, even when it didn't feel real. And Nathan, so assured in his finance job, so convinced his way was the only way. As I sat there pretending to care about their banal chatter, I realized how little they knew about the life I'd built for myself, how little they knew about what I had achieved without their approval. When dinner ended and I stood up to leave, no one seemed to notice. Nathan was too absorbed in his phone, and my parents were already planning the next family gathering like they always did. I didn't fit into their world anymore, and they didn't fit into mine. On the drive back to my apartment, I felt the weight of it all pressing down. Pretending was exhausting. The constant pretending that I wasn't successful, that I wasn't doing something important, had worn me out. I couldn't keep lying to them. Something had to change. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I pulled into my apartment parking lot, still numb from the visit with my family. The weight of everything sat heavy on my chest, pressing down. I was tired, tired of pretending, tired of playing small. But what else was I supposed to do? As I stepped out of the car, my phone buzzed. I checked the screen, expecting something trivial. A message from Jack. My pulse kicked up. "Emily, I wanted to let you know that your work is being considered for the Hidden Truths exhibition. It's a major international show, and it's going to bring a lot of attention to the work we've been discussing. You've been keeping things quiet, but the demand for your pieces is higher than ever." I stood there in the parking lot, feeling the ground shift under me. This was it. The big one. The kind of exhibition that could make Ember a cultural icon. A chance for my work to be seen on a global stage. And yet, I didn't feel the excitement I thought I would. "There's one thing," Jack continued in the next message. We're still keeping your identity under wraps. But as the show gets closer, we'll need to talk about how you want to present yourself publicly. If you're comfortable with it, we can reveal you as the artist behind Ember. But that's up to you. I stared at the text, feeling a mix of exhilaration and dread. Revealing myself, my true identity, would change everything. The attention, the interviews, the people who demand answers. But it would also mean facing my family. Finally telling them the truth, that the girl they thought was struggling in her hobby had actually been building something real. I paced the small hallway in my apartment, the floor creaking beneath my feet. Jack had been right about one thing. This show could launch my career into a whole new level. Ember could be a household name. People would want to know who I was, what I stood for. It could be the validation I'd always craved, but never got. I sat down at my desk, staring at the email Jack had forwarded. The show was called Hidden Truths, an ironic title, given that I'd spent years hiding behind Ember. If I agreed to this, it wouldn't just be a reveal of my art. It would be the beginning of a new phase of my life. It would mean stepping out of the shadows. But did I want to do that? The thought of my family finding out made me sick. They'd never understand. They'd probably see this as proof they were right all along, that I should have played it safe and gone for a real career. I could already hear my dad's voice, the disappointment behind it. This isn't practical, Emily. You need stability. A job that pays the bills. I typed a quick reply to Jack, my fingers hovering over the keys as I debated what to say. Thanks for the opportunity. I need some time to think. Can we talk about this in person? I hit send before I could second guess myself. As the minutes ticked by, my mind raced. On one hand, this was everything I'd been working toward. It was the recognition I deserved, the exposure that could change my life. But the other side of it, the truth, the inevitable confrontation with my family, it felt like a weight I wasn't sure I could bear. What if they found out? What if Nathan laughed in my face? What if my parents were ashamed of me? But then again, I was already ashamed of them, for not seeing me, for dismissing me, for making me feel small. Maybe this was my chance to finally take control, to stop hiding. I stood up, pacing again, my hands shaking. The truth was, the thought of keeping my identity hidden any longer felt suffocating. The art world had already embraced Ember. I was already a success in that world, even if no one in my family would ever understand it. I took a deep breath. Maybe it was time to stop pretending. When Jack called an hour later, I answered without hesitation. Emily, he said, his voice smooth. Have you thought about it? I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Yeah, I'm in. Let's do it. Let's reveal Ember for who she really is. Great, he said, clearly relieved. We'll plan the announcement around the show. This is going to be big. Are you ready for it? I didn't hesitate this time. I'm ready. As I ended the call, I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight lift just a little. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward for years. I had no idea what would come next. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. The night before the opening of Hidden Truths, I sat on my couch, staring at my phone. The screen was dark, but I could feel the weight of everything about to shift. Tomorrow, my identity would be out there. No more hiding behind Ember, no more anonymous success. It was terrifying, but also liberating. I had spent years avoiding this moment, fearing the fallout. But now, I couldn't back out. Not after everything. I leaned back, closing my eyes, trying to quiet the voices in my head. But then my phone buzzed again. Nathan. Hey, Em. Just saw some of your old photos online. Why didn't you keep up with that stuff? You should have stuck with it. You were good. Maybe I'll show them to some people at work. Could be a good side thing for you. I stared at the message, reading it over and over, each time feeling the sting of it a little more. He had no idea what had been happening with my work, no clue about the real value of it. Just a casual mention, as if he was doing me a favor by noticing something I'd dropped. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. He still didn't know. They still didn't know the extent of what I'd built. My family's perception of me was stuck in that same place. The naive little sister with a hobby, chasing some impractical dream. I could almost hear my dad's voice echoing in my head. You need something stable, Emily. You can't rely on art forever. And Nathan, always the well-meaning but clueless older brother, trying to convince me to do more of what he thought was practical. He still didn't see how far I'd come, how much I'd achieved without their approval. But tomorrow, they'd know. The whole world would know. The weight of that truth settled on my chest, and I was suddenly unsure if I was ready to face it. Could I handle their shock? Their disappointment? Could I deal with the fact that everything I'd been hiding would come crashing down? I shoved the phone aside, trying to focus. I had to get to the gallery tomorrow. I had to show up, whether I was ready or not. But as I drove through the empty streets toward the exhibition, my mind kept circling back to the same question. What if they found out before I was ready? What if they saw the truth before I'd had a chance to prepare for it? By the time I stepped out of my car and into the gallery, I could feel the tension in my shoulders. The room was already starting to fill with people, collectors, and critics, the kind of crowd I had always dreamed of. The white walls gleamed under the spotlights, the photos in their frames looking like they belonged. It was beautiful. The work looked like it belonged, but I didn't know if I did. Emily, you made it. Jack's voice broke through my thoughts as he walked up grinning. He looked as polished as ever, his smile genuine. This is going to be huge. The crowd's already buzzing. I forced a smile. Yeah, it's incredible. It feels surreal. He clapped me on the back. You've earned it, believe me. Just wait until they see your pieces. People are already asking about the artist behind Ember. You've got a following, Emily. This is the start of something big. I nodded, but inside I was still questioning everything. The night unfolded like a dream. Critics praised my work, buyers eagerly discussed my pieces, and people I didn't even recognize came up to congratulate me. It was everything I had ever wanted. But even as I listened to them talk about my art, there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind. Tomorrow my family would find out. Tomorrow I would have to face them and tell them what I'd been hiding. I stayed at the gallery longer than I expected, letting the buzz of the crowd pull me in, trying to ignore the underlying fear that I wasn't ready for this. But when the night finally wound down, I realized something. I was proud. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to let my work stand on its own. For years, I had hidden behind Ember, and now people were seeing the art. They weren't asking about my past or my family. They were just looking at the photos, appreciating them for what they were. As the last of the guests filtered out, I stood alone in the gallery, my reflection in the glass of one of the frames. It was hard to ignore the sense of accomplishment that came with seeing my work on these walls, but I knew I couldn't ignore the consequences either. Tomorrow I'd face my family, and I wasn't sure how it would go. But for tonight I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Real, honest pride. I was still processing the night when my phone rang. I barely looked at the screen, but I knew who it was before I even saw the name. Nathan. I answered it, letting the words hang in the air. Hey, Nathan. Emily, he said, a little too enthusiastically. I just saw the show in the paper. Congratulations. Why didn't you invite me? I mean, come on. How could you not tell me about something so huge? I swallowed. I hadn't invited him. I hadn't even mentioned it to him. It wasn't like I didn't want him there. It was more like I didn't want him there at all, knowing what he would think of the whole thing that had been built without his input or approval. Yeah, it was kind of last minute, I said, shrugging even though he couldn't see me. I didn't really expect it to blow up like that. Well, that's awesome. I'm really proud of you, Em. I mean, you've been doing your thing, and now it's getting noticed, right? I always knew you had it in you. Nathan's voice was sincere, but there was an edge of his usual smugness underneath, like he was just figuring out that I might be worth something after all. I clenched my teeth. The words were like salt in an open wound. Proud of you, Em. As if he hadn't spent years telling me my work was a waste of time. But I couldn't go there. Not now. Not when things were finally falling into place for me. So, what's next? Nathan asked, still riding the wave of excitement. I've been thinking, maybe I can help you find a new gallery for your stuff. I know a couple of people who could get you connected. You know, more of the serious shows. Something bigger. A tight laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Serious shows? What did he think this was? A hobby? Thanks, but I think I'm good for now, I said, my voice neutral. I've got things covered. Well, hey, if you change your mind, let me know. I can set something up. I'm proud of you, Em. Really. There it was again. The pride, like it was some new thing for him. As if everything he'd ever said about my art hadn't been dismissive or condescending. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the familiar weight of guilt settling into my stomach. Maybe I should tell him everything. Tell him about Ember, about the exhibitions I'd kept secret. But then I pictured his face, confused, maybe even a little offended that I hadn't told him sooner. And I knew that if I told him, it wouldn't just be about my art, it would be about his pride, his need to be part of it in some way. I ran my fingers through my hair. trying to push the frustration aside. Yeah, I'll think about it, I said, my voice catching slightly. Thanks for calling, Nate. Anytime, sis. Seriously, I'm proud of you. The words rang in my ears as I ended the call. I stared at my phone for a few moments, hearing his voice in my head. Proud of you, Em. I had built this, everything about it, alone. All the years of hiding, all the work that had gone unnoticed, had led to this moment. And now Nathan was congratulating me, as if it was the first time he'd ever really seen me. I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Not when it felt like everything I'd worked for would be reduced to just another thing Nathan could take credit for. There was still too much he didn't understand. Too much he couldn't see. The truth settled in again. I had reached a level of success he couldn't even comprehend. And part of me, despite the guilt, despite everything, was proud of that. Proud that I had managed to keep it hidden, proud that I had built something bigger than any of them had ever imagined, without their help or approval. But I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending. I'd been dreading this for months, maybe even years. The dinner with my parents and Nathan was set. The time had come. I could feel the tension in my chest, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me with every passing minute. I'd arranged it like any normal dinner. My parents' place, casual. I'd promised to catch up and figured it would be a good time to tell them everything. Maybe it would be the right moment. Maybe it would finally feel like I wasn't living a lie anymore. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be easy. I drove over in silence, the car windows down, hoping the breeze would settle my nerves, but nothing did. Not even the calm of their neighborhood could help. I parked in the driveway, hesitated before getting out, and then forced myself to ring the doorbell. Nathan opened the door, a wide grin on his face. Hey, sis, you're right on time. I followed him inside, where the scent of Mom's lasagna filled the air. She was bustling around the kitchen, as usual, a flurry of efficiency and care. Dad was seated at the table with a newspaper, the same routine as always. Emily, glad you could make it, Dad said without looking up, his voice warm but distracted. I sat down at the table, feeling like I was about to drop a bomb. The usual small talk started. How the weather was, what Nathan had been up to with his work, all the mundane things I could barely pretend to care about anymore. It was like I was still the little sister who didn't quite fit in. I kept nodding, trying to seem normal, trying to breathe through the rising panic. It wasn't until dessert, when the dishes had been cleared away, that I felt the moment come. I could feel the weight of everything I had been holding back. It felt like the time had arrived, but there was no turning back once I said it. Listen, there's something I've been meaning to tell you both, I said, my voice quieter than usual. It's about my photography. Mom and Dad exchanged looks, probably expecting me to talk about my hobby or the lack of progress in my career. Nathan was lounging in his chair, clearly uninterested, flipping through his phone. What's going on, Em? Mom asked, her tone light. I took a deep breath. I've been living under a different name for a while now. Not just doing photography for fun, but actually building a career around it. Nathan glanced up, confused. What do you mean, under a different name? He laughed a little. Like a nickname or something? I could feel the tension in the room rise. No, not a nickname. I've been using a pseudonym, Ember. I looked at them, my parents, trying to gauge their reaction. I've been building a career in the art world for a while now, and I've had some significant success. There was a long silence. The kind that made my heart race, and the seconds felt like hours. You've been, what? Dad's voice was incredulous, and for a moment I thought he might be angry. Em, you never said anything about this. You're telling me you've been living this whole life and we had no idea. I nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, I've been doing well. Selling my prints for high prices, exhibiting in galleries. The show in New York. It's just the beginning. New York? Mom repeated, her face a mix of disbelief and confusion. Wait, so all that time you were telling us you were just doing, what? Hobby stuff. That wasn't the truth. No, it wasn't, I said, feeling a sharp edge to my words. It was never just a hobby, but I kept it from you because I felt like you'd never understand. You never saw my work as serious. You always told me I needed to find something stable. I looked at Dad, then Mom. You made it clear that being an artist wasn't a real job. Nathan, who'd been quiet up until that point, blinked a few times. Wait, hold on. He pulled out his phone, and a few seconds later, he let out a little laugh. Ember? You're Ember? I nodded, feeling my chest tighten. He stared at the screen, scrolling through some article. This says your work's worth millions of dollars now. What the hell, Em? His voice was a mix of surprise and disbelief, like he couldn't wrap his mind around what I'd been doing. His gaze flicked between the screen and me, his expression changing from confusion to something close to amusement. But then slowly, the joke seemed to fade. You, you're serious, aren't you? He asked, sounding small now. I nodded again, my heart racing. Yes, I'm serious, Nathan. I'm not the person you thought I was. And I didn't hide it to hurt you. I did it because every time I tried to show you my work, you dismissed it. You never took it seriously. Mom's face had softened a little, but Dad was still frowning, trying to make sense of it all. But why not tell us? Why keep it from us all these years? Because, I started, my voice shaky, but I had to say it. Because I never felt like I'd get your approval. You always made me feel like what I was doing was pointless. Like I wasn't good enough, and I didn't want to hear it. So I hid it. My voice cracked, and I bit my lip to keep it together. I didn't think you'd ever understand. Mom sat back in her chair staring at me. Her face was a mix of sadness and confusion. Emily, we never meant to make you feel that way. We just didn't understand. I know, I said, my voice softening. But that's the thing. You never did. And I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep being the failure in your eyes. The room was quiet for a long moment. Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking between me and Mom and Dad. It was obvious none of them knew how to react. Finally, Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. I still don't fully understand, Em, but I guess I can't argue with success. He met my eyes. I'm sorry. We didn't see it. Neither did I said softly, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. But maybe that's something we can change now. 6 months had passed since that dinner. The weight I'd been carrying had lifted in ways I couldn't fully explain, but I was starting to feel the shift. My family was different now. They didn't fully understand what it meant to be an artist, especially one who had built an entire career on her own terms, but they were trying. Nathan, in particular, had made a point to stay more involved, sending me articles about photography and even mentioning connections he could help me with. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Tonight, I was hosting another gallery show, this time with my family in attendance. It wasn't a small, quiet event this time. This one had momentum, a real crowd, and my parents were here, standing beside me in a way they never had before. I couldn't help but notice the difference in their expressions tonight. They weren't just looking at me out of obligation or duty. They were proud, and that made all the difference. Mom was admiring a black and white portrait on the wall, one of my earlier pieces that had been part of my first exhibit. She turned to me, her eyes soft. This one, it's really something, Emily. I'm glad you kept going with it. I smiled. Thanks, Mom. It means a lot to hear that. Nathan was standing next to me, his hands tucked in his pockets, a little more serious than usual. The air between us had changed. The distance was gone. He wasn't the same person who'd laughed off my work. I owe you an apology, Nathan said, his voice low, almost tentative. I didn't get it, not really. But I see it now, all of it. You were right to keep doing this. You've built something bigger than I ever realized. I looked at him, his face earnest. I'm glad you see it now. He looked at one of the larger prints hanging on the wall, a massive shot of a cityscape at dawn, the sky melting into hues of pink and orange. I was wrong. About a lot of things. You're not just doing photography, you're making a statement. I see how much effort it takes now, how much you've built. He glanced over at me, his gaze softening. I'm proud of you, Emily. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I appreciate that, Nathan. I really do. Dad walked up then, his eyes scanning the gallery, taking in the crowd of collectors and art lovers circling the space, nodding in approval as they took in my work. When he finally turned to me, he spoke slowly, like he was choosing his words carefully. You were always right, Emily, he said, his voice tinged with something that almost sounded like regret. We didn't get it. We didn't see what you were building, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm proud of you. Proud of the work you've put in. He waved his hand toward the room, the artwork on display. This is something we can't ignore. You've made it. I felt the heat of his words settle in my chest. For the first time, I felt like they were seeing me, not just the daughter they thought needed direction, but the person I had become. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing in front of one of my favorite pieces, a black and white portrait of a woman who looked almost ghostly in the way light and shadow played across her features. I took a slow breath, absorbing everything. The crowd, the conversations, the quiet admiration. But more than that, I was absorbing the weight of this moment, the way it felt to finally, fully be seen. The gallery was buzzing with life, with my work at the center of it all, and I was finally at peace, not just with my career, but with myself. I had reclaimed my identity, both publicly and privately. And as I stood there surrounded by my family, I realized this was the beginning of something new, something real, something I could finally call my own.